So next up on the quick looks at some of Games Workshop's kits is the Tau Pathfinder team or squad. This box set is in this packaging in the version that I have. It comes in other packaging in other versions as well. And just like all the other boxes, it has examples of the figures on the back, showing you them posed, an example of the paint scheme and where you can find additional information. And that's it, straightforward for the box. You can build a grand total of 13 miniatures, and all of them are pictured here. So that's 10 actual Pathfinders in the squad, and then a couple of drones, smaller drones in different configurations, and then a larger recon drone. It also comes with the instructions and a set of decals. Now, disclaimer, Tau were a faction introduced when I was much younger. I was fascinated with them back then, but as I've mentioned in other videos, I haven't really had much engagement with 40k products since then. I do remember the Pathfinders back as they were, and they were metal figures with quite elongated, slightly feline poses, which I wasn't necessarily a huge fan of. And obviously they've had somewhat of an update and been introduced in plastics in the years since. For example, rail rifles. Now, not in a blister pack, but a plastic version. Great. Drones have been slimmed down. You used to be able to take big groups of drones. But now the kits come with drones in different versions. You've got a marker and a gun drone, and this very large and chunky recon drone that's now included in the kit as well. So first things first, we'll look at the other bits and pieces. The whole kit was put together using just 2 sprues, which is very impressive actually, because there is a huge amount of variety in terms of the weapon options you can give them, and I haven't even used all of them. They have catered for the fact that you might want to have multiple of the same weapons in the squad. You can have up to 3 of the special weapons, so ion rifles or rail rifles, and these are all available on the sprue. So you can see here there's 1 ion rifle there, and another one on this sprue. You could have had 3 of each. And that's pretty good, because in some kits you tend to find, well, you could build this many options, but actually we've only given you 1 of each of those special weapons, and therefore you can't necessarily customize as you would like. But from these 2 sprues, lots of leftover bits as well that I haven't used. I've used all the pouches because I like putting kit and equipment on the figures, and you've got the leftover bits of the drones as well. One slight disclaimer as well is that there's a great deal of potential conversion and sort of interoperability between this set and the regular Fire Warriors. You could customize the kits backwards and forwards and use pieces from these for the Fire Warriors as well, but that hadn't actually arrived yet, so I've just gone ahead and built the Pathfinders, which, you know, I might regret later on, but it was a lot of fun. So apart from the sprues, this is the decal sheet, which is upside down, unhelpfully. And as you can see, it gives an indication of where the decals can go in terms of not just for this set, but for other figures as well. So for the Crisis battle suits, the larger Riptide battle suits, etc. One thing I have noticed is these are almost exclusively in red, these markings, which is in keeping with the colour scheme they've gone for the example miniatures from Heavy Metal and in the box art. The classic vomit brown colour scheme was catered for with white markings in the same pattern. I'm not sure if those are necessarily available elsewhere still, but I suppose you could probably paint them on. But it is a difference, for example, if you want to do the figures painted in that classic vomit brown scheme from the Tau set, then these don't necessarily accord with the artwork. However, they are very nice nevertheless as an inclusion. Standard instruction manual here, so setting out how the different figures fit together, telling you what you've got in terms of poses, how to put the squad leader together, some examples of how the bits can go onto them, including customization options, so different heads, different bits of kit, different weapons options or scanners and things they can have in their hands. It doesn't show all of them, that's one thing to note here. And then, for example, different variants on how you can put the other figures together. So the standard Tau Pathfinder with a pulse carbine, the different carbine arms. The only thing about these is have a careful look about how they'll sit and fit together on the models, because some of them are more in the shoulder in the aiming. Some of them, which are quite nice, have got a finger along the trigger guard angled downwards in slightly sort of modern day infantry type pose. And then these ones where they're reloading the clip, or in one case that hand, I think that's meant to be some form of grenade in their hand. And then you go on to the special weapon options, and as I said before, they give the option to have all 3 ion rifles as the 3 special weapon choices, all 3 rail rifles as the special weapon choices, and then how those go together and which parts they are, and gives you examples of fitting them to the model. Up here, you've got a case some of the customization parts. So they've got their hand up on the antenna for their radio communicating. They've got some like binoculars. They've got a kind of scanner or a drone controller, and how you can fit those bits together. And I'll show in a moment how I used those. And an example of all the different pouches that you can fit on to give them a bit of individual customization. And then on this page, how the drones go together, and they're very, very straightforward. What you can't do, although you can do multiples of the weapons for the Pathfinders, what you can't do is do multiples of different drones. So for example, you couldn't do 2 gun drones, you couldn't do 2 marker drones, you can only build 1 of each type. And so as you'll see in a minute, I've built 1 marker, 1 gun drone. And then this beefy chap is built as you see him. And that's it, that's the instruction manual. Although as an aside, in common, they have some basic stats and examples of which weapon systems match up to which stats inside the manual. So in terms of the figures themselves, I love the Tau aesthetic. I really like the way they were designed, even though they've been around for a little while now. The updates they've had, in common with a Games Workshop product, I'm not necessarily as keen with some of the massive models they've come out with. I prefer sort of infantry skirmish scale things with only 1 or 2 larger models of figures, but that's neither here nor there when it comes to the kit. It's very self-evident how they fit together, unlike my criticism of the way that some of the kits have been designed, perhaps in more recent times. For example, in the Sisters of Battle video I did, these are designed so that they come as legs, torso, arms, head, and then weapons as well. Some of the weapons are attached to the arms already, some aren't necessarily. And there is variation in all different arm types. So you can have, for example, there's three different versions of the rail rifle, 3 different versions of the ion rifle. There are multiple different poses and stances and firing positions for how they're holding their carbines, and that all gives you a great deal of customization in terms of how you pose the figures and put them together. There are obviously still limitations. My biggest complaint about this kit is that there is some extreme forward tilt in the hips and waist area of some of the figures that mean you can't quite pose some of the arm sets totally sort of naturally or as you might like. This is best summed up by looking at the instructions. For example, these ones, that is a very, very harsh angle to the front that's going to have the torso angled at almost 45 degrees. Now you can get around that by the way you pose the arms, and you'll see that in terms of the way the figures have been done. For example, this chap, it is totally achievable to get a pretty cool looking pose in there, where it looks like he's got his weapon at the ready, he's just leaning well forward in his stance and in his firing position. And that's okay, but it is worth noting that you do need to cut the bits off and have a bit of a play around with how are they going to fit together, otherwise you might end up with some unnatural or awkward poses. And that's my biggest suggestion, is that having been given the freedom to pose these at the waist, dry fitting them together is probably a good idea. And what I like to do is fit the arms to the torso and then arrange it around the waist, because that's just the way I like to work. In terms of the figures I put together, so I've got 2 rail rifles at the end. I really like this reloading figure that I've got on the end here. And then you've got one chap that's taking a shot, and the guy with the ion rifle that's moving forward. In terms of other poses, I put this one together. He's not the squad leader. I just wanted to use that binocular because I think it looks cool. So he's got his weapon at sort of the low port, and he's taking a little look. And then the squad leader here, he's doing what a good section commander should be doing. He's trying to coordinate the battle. Perhaps he's controlling one of the drones. He's using some kind of scanner. He's he's radioing in the contact. He's got his weapon slung to one side. And I quite like that pose for the squad leader, rather than a more traditional sort of leading from the front, dynamic, swinging a sword type pose for a squad leader. And then he's got his assistant squad leader, his 2IC there. And then you've got 5 more generic Pathfinders armed with the carbines. I did want to experiment with some of the different arms and poses. So in terms of those, this was a way of me getting around the sort of very forward-leaning sort of pelvic tilt in the miniature by giving him a firing pose, because he's leaning right into his pose as he moves forward and leaning into the weapon. This guy's just on a knee. You'll notice I haven't put the marker lights on all the weapons. I actually quite like the pulse carbine without the marker light on top. It gives it kind of a nice clean aesthetic. And then that one has got one. This chap that I illustrated already, who I quite like the pose for, and a couple of other versions. So this guy's in the act of reloading whilst moving forward. And this chap has got some kind of small grenade or something in his other hand that he's just preparing as he advances, still with the weapon in the shoulder. At the back, you've got a gun drone on the right-hand side, a marker drone on the left-hand side, and then this big recon drone with a burst cannon in the middle. As I say, in terms of how the figures went together, very straightforward. I very much like the fact that you were able to get more out of the kit, that you could push some of the poses and the arrangements of the arms pretty hard to get some nice, unique little poses. Yeah, there's always going to be a certain similarity, especially if you've had more and more of them. But I think you're able to achieve more variation with the nature of the way this kit was designed than the way this Sisters of Battle kit was designed, where you had no option in terms of their the core dynamic of their pose. Yes, these have got legs that are duplicated, but you have got options in the numbers of legs. So you've got two of these, one of those, two of these, and one of these. That automatically gives you some variation to then fit to the torsos and the weapons, and that just all multiplies out to give you a squad that's going to look fairly individual across these figures, but then isn't going to look too duplicated when set against another squad of a similar type. And that's it. It's a very straightforward squad. What you see is what you get. I'm very impressed that you're able to put all this together using just 2 sprues. And I know already, it hasn't arrived yet, that this will be interchangeable with the Fire Warrior kit, for example. So you could have had customization between. I know, for example, I'd seen an image of firing a pulse pistol that I thought, oh, that would look quite good in this squad. But that's something for another day. However, given also the price point of this compared to some of the other boxes, I think this is a really good value set. You get a lot out of it, and the miniatures are just super cool, but then I'm slightly biased on my own sort of preference for that sort of faction and design aesthetic. Anyway, I hope having a look at these has been useful. What I might do just in a moment is, for scale comparison's sake, put them next to one of the Sisters of Battle figures from my other video, just so you can get a sense of proportion. And there we go. As promised, just for scale comparison's sake, you can see that the new Sisters of Battle figures do stand quite a little bit taller than their Tau opponents here. But that's kind of fine. I mean, the Tau, I think, in the fiction are meant to be sort of 5'6", 7" on average. The Sisters of Battle here are going to be at least 6 foot. This is in the future in terms of, sort of genetics, biological differences, nutrition, and so on. They've also been enhanced, let's face it, and are in power armor, which is going to make them taller, more bulky. So I don't think there's a great scale discrepancy here. And then if you imagine the new Primaris Marines stood next to them, those would be even taller, but that would be in keeping with a relative sense of scale and proportion. However, I hope this helps in giving you a sense of how they line up in terms of scale comparison. And that's it. I hope to see you in the next video.